If we perceive it from the point of view of absolute reality, none of that is, of course, real. All this belongs to the realm of play of consciousness, right? Consciousness self-interacts with itself, so there's no abuser, no abuse, no perpetrator, no victim. But from this local, down-to-earth, specific perspective, all this is intact. All roles are played, and all these roles are in accord with what is meant to be experienced. The relationships and sexual energy. Kundalini activation through touch, navigating energy, projections, and trust. The short background, and there are 3 questions, clearly outlined and numbered. So first background. I have been practicing with your online courses for a few years now. I have taken the Kundalini course twice. I believe I have experienced a tantric activation while receiving a psychic massage during a training. An activation that was probably facilitated by prior years of meditation and intense spiritual practice. The activation facilitated a profound third eye opening that lasted days and a strong sexual force and projection towards the person giving the massage that lasted months or even years. Questions. First question. My question is, can Kundalini be initiated by a massage, and can the field of 2 people get entangled? What can prevent this? What causes this? All right, let's respond to this before we proceed with other questions. Again, if by massage we mean just the manipulation, let's say, of certain movements on the skin by hand, right? Following certain systems, maybe Ayurvedic massage, maybe thigh massage, maybe whatever other massages there are. There are many different types massages, oil-based, there are dry massages. Some massages have emphasis for moving the lymph, right? There's a lot of that, the whole school of why it is important to move the lymph in the body. And whether people can get entangled and whether this can initiate Kundalini awakening. I would suggest that Kundalini awakens not because of some physical movements applied to the body. With that being said, it can be clinically awakened by some exertion when there is a tremendous, let's say, force applied, a pressure at a particular point in our physiology, which corresponds to certain, let's say, endocrinal activity within the body at the level of this distribution of glands, and that in turn can trigger activation of life force, which may awaken Kundalini or may not, and just be that, the activation of pranic force, pranotana. Examples are given very often, a childbirth, or, for example, experiencing physical trauma, being in a car crash, being in a situation when one feels and when one comes very close to death, maybe drowning, maybe being in a situation where one was suffocating. All this could trigger, and examples of that are plenty out there. But Massage, I doubt very much. I'm not excluding that entirely, but all I'm saying is that I doubt that a massage, no matter how skillfully or intensely performed, can trigger the authentic Kundalini awakening. Simply because that isn't consistent with the understanding. If massage was performed at the level, let's say, which is far goes beyond what the term massage here represents. This is why I said at the very beginning, it depends what every one of us call massage. Was it just a massage, or was it more than that? Was it accompanied by a tremendous physical force applied by a therapist on you? So this remains to be questions answered by you and you only. So entanglement, if I understand that properly, can happen with anyone at any time when there is an exchange of energy. It could happen even at the remote level, not necessarily when two people are in direct physical proximity, let alone as in the case when, let's say, that auric field is have that level of direct exchange, right? As in the case of when we receive or give massage. That goes both ways. This is why all therapists who are involved in these professions, all masseurs, hopefully go through a proper education, proper training, which also includes the way of how to handle this in terms of the body boundaries, ethics, what is, effectively speaking, is part, an indispensable part of giving someone a massage, or what could be crossing that boundary further. And this is very important, of course. And of course, I don't know, it differs from system to system. Some of the, let's say, massages are known for very, very intense and very close physical proximity, not just hands moving across the body, but like in Thai massage, the masseurs use their feet, their elbows, other parts of their body to exert certain pressure to, like literally hopping on top of your back, or, like massaging your limbs with application of, parts of the body where the greater pressure can be applied, as in the case of the elbow. So all this, of course, is very, very physical. So some exchange of energies, no doubt, is there. But I wouldn't go as far as to conclude that this can be on par with energetic transmission of what happens, let's say, in the cases where, classically speaking, the transmission of energy is through the assisted Shakti pad, the transmission of force, right? Transmission of power. Let's move to the second question from you. Can this, on a large scale, cause drama, such as happened in my spiritual communities with so-called gurus that ended in stories of abuse? Can the stories of abuse be a consequence of projections, stories liberated by the activation, so not being in fact real? How to distinguish between a clear, pure field and what is just pretending to be such? And the final question. And finally, how do I recover my trust in my own process and path? Do you have any words? All right, so well, that's quite quite a bit of, let's say, aspects, topics thrown into the mix. Because if we are to speak about how can this on a large scale cause drama, such as what happened in many spiritual communities with so-called gurus that ended in stories of abuse. So we're having a jump or leap here from receiving a massage, getting entangled as a result, according to your, let's say, experience, and then into spiritual communities with so-called gurus. Yes, stretching this, I could see the connection maybe, right? Not that I know many gurus who perform massages on their students, and I'm trying to be speaking directly without any tongue-in-cheek attitude, simply trying to understand exactly what is it that you bring in your inquiry. You go further. Can the stories of abuse be a consequence of projections? Stories liberated by the activation, so not being in fact real. It all depends how we view it. Everything is real or unreal depending on how we, let's say, choose to, or how we perceive the situation. So this is really deeply personal, I would say, and I don't know if this can be objectively responded in terms of what is real when it comes to someone's experience with someone else, right? So as a result, let's say as an outcome, to answer that, how to distinguish between a clear, pure pure field and what is just pretending to be. It's not as easy. Yes, I agree with you, because we could give different variables here. Someone who, let's say, has been put in a position to assist someone in the process, and depending on methodologies used, let's say, where there is a, like in Tantra in particular, there is this an indispensable and very, very definitive energy element. The element of energetic transmission is involved, even if one is not necessarily applying this in its direct measure. Let's say we mentioned Shaktipat earlier. Even if the tantric adept does not necessarily apply that, let's say, Shaktipat, as in the case of assisting through the sense of touch, let's say placing one's hand on someone's top of the head, or tapping someone, like on the back or what have you, massaging certain, let's say, energetic centers on the forehead, and so forth. Even if one performs that without the sense of touch, just by looking the gaze with someone, or through the sound of one voice, through the initiation into a particular sound syllable, like a mantra, or purely being exposed to one's environment, as also is not at all uncommon. Simply being in the environment which, energetically speaking, soaks these vibrations, and one becomes subjected to these vibrations, and that could also be considered as that transmission of energy. But even with the teachers who don't necessarily do that, there is also a possibility of that projection. So, in other words, if the teacher's intentions are pure, let's say we give that scenario first, pure and wholesome, he or she just doing their job, but the intentions or the projections of the aspirant, the follower, the student, the disciple, are not so pure, let's say, for whatever reason, then the projections will be immediately colored, and one may begin to perceive this as someone's advancement. And that, in fact, would be somehow psychologically here played in that psychological reverse game. So, on one hand, one would secretly welcome that, because that somehow appeases one's sense of anticipation.
On the other hand, one would be outraged by that outwardly, perhaps. See, this is not uncommon. And as I said, it could even happen to the teacher, like your straightforward non-duality teacher who simply sits, does his or her job, and there's none of that energetic component. They just speak, respond to questions. The projections are there as well. So the projections of the one who happened to be on the receiving end can also color that what one receives, particularly in that one-on-one exchanges, interchanges, as if the teacher is making advances. And one would walk out of the room feeling that there is something going on. Okay, so that's one example. Another example, let's say opposite of that, is that the intentions of the disciple, the receiver, are pure. They are there just for the spiritual evolution, right? For healing, for, let's say, learning. But the intentions of the preceptor, whoever happened that person to be, are not so pure. And so, of course, this will create that potential entanglement in a sense that the teacher who is in that role, in that position, also imbued with the sense of authority, would project on the disciple their desires, and the disciple, whoever happened to be in that role, would perhaps receive these mixed feelings of what is taking place as opposed to what they hoped or thought meant to take place. So we just gave this radically opposite just to give us that kind of, let's say, fuller spectrum of what could happen. Whether this is real or not, again, it is very hard to tell, because how can we know what is real, and do we dismiss this as being not real because these projections are just projections and nothing to do with the reality of what spiritual, let's say, awakening dynamics here represent? So how to distinguish between the clear pure field and what pretends to be is a very, very, I would say, vast topic, and one unfortunately is not at all can apply certain do's or don'ts, although there is even, let's say, speaking about it in practical matters, in practical terms, there are obviously certain parameters out there which one would be advised to be familiarized with, of how to approach a teacher, how to approach someone wants to want to learn from, so as to understand in advance and to know that one would feel comfortable, reassured, one would not feel cheated, one would not feel somehow disappointed, let alone ended up being abused or causing the abuse, because again, I don't want it to have only one way affair here. The abuse here belongs to both parties. There is, of course, greater possibility for the one in the position of the teacher to cause an abuse of someone, abuse through the power, abuse through the authority figure, and whatever other, let's say, forms of abuse that can issue. That's all an outcome of primarily of that. But likewise, there are also cases, and they're quite frequent, I would say, of when a particularly experienced, I'm using this in inverted commas, seeker comes into the field of spiritual teacher, into his domain or her domain, with their own often hidden agendas, not agendas that are clearly outlined in terms of their pure intentions for receiving knowledge, learning, or healing, or whatever else they may come for in terms of the wholesomeness of the affair. But they come because they somehow driven by the propensity to manipulate, to gain some recognition, to gain some, let's say, other benefits that may come with that. And I can tell you from my own personal experiences This is not very easy to discern from get going. So there are learning curves for both parties, I would say. So whether this is real or not, again, it depends how we perceive that. If we perceive it from the point of view of absolute reality, none of that is, of course, real. All this belongs to the realm of play of consciousness, right? Consciousness self-interacts with itself, so there's no abuser, no abuse, no perpetrator, no victim. But from this local, down-to-earth, specific perspective, all this is intact. All roles are played, and all these roles are in accord with what is meant to be experienced. Real or not, again, depends on how we perceive it. So, how can you recover your trust in your own process and path? Well, I would say that to recover your own trust in your own self and your own path, right, in your own process, you have to be, first of all, able to, if you consider yourself being entangled, to disentangle yourself completely, or to the degree where you feel you are free and no longer, let's say, in that sense, feeling energetic presence of that person, whomever that happened to be. And that may not be easy. So maybe a certain, let's say, forgiveness, certain letting go, maybe accompanied by a small little offering, little ritual that I always recommend in these cases, so as to express a gratitude on one hand for whatever this experience provided, because from that, let's say, overarching, all-encompassing perspective, all experience meant to highlight something about ourselves, right? So none of this should be considered to be as being hard done for nothing. Of course, there are degrees. I don't want it to be suddenly confronted here with survival of the Holocaust, whether this was a required experience or not. This, of course, let's apply the common sense here. But by large, perpetrator victim is spoken even in the Western psychological framework of understanding as mutually interrelating realities. So there is this, what empowers and highlights and informs these two aspects. So if we want to come out of that role, let's say, if we will no longer feel happy to play that role of being hard done, we don't want to be in the role of the victim, then it is impossible without forgiving to the one whom we, let's say, feel begrudges towards, and that forgiveness energetically releases us from that entanglement. So this is why I said it's a little ritual, lighting up a candle, maybe some offering incense, this, that, saying words of gratitude. And as soon as we say these words of gratitude, thank you for this experience. I've learned quite a bit about myself, and I no longer wish to remain entangled in this affair. So I am in full forgiveness. So please, let's just release this and let go. It's not at all needed to reach out to the person. Please be very attentive. It's not about resolving it at the level of having some closure, unless there was a relationship and you were involved in that relationship, because your information is scarce, it's very basic, and I understand. Maybe you didn't want to disclose that, but I'm just saying that if we truly want to disentangle from someone something, we have to do that at our level first and foremost, because it's never about going and sorting it out with someone, because there's no someone outside of our own field of awareness. So that's the reality of the situation. That's the monistic perspective. So we work from that monistic perspective, from the level of consciousness. We release it back into the magnanimous waters, magnanimous ocean of awareness, have it all. And with that release, we are free to regain our sovereignty. And often that alone suffices for regaining the sense of trust.